Last night, we watched in horror as war was breaking out at a nuclear power plant in Ukraine. In fact, it's the largest nuclear power plant in Europe. Zaporizhia, as it's been, I'm told it's how it's pronounced. I'm probably pronouncing it wrong still. But at this power plant, there was reportedly shelling from the Russians. Now, of course, it's war. There's fog of war, and some people are disputing whether or not this even happened. But the reporting right now is that the nuclear power plant is currently occupied by Russian forces, and the people there are working at gunpoint. Now, the U.S. Embassy in Kyiv has said the shelling of this nuclear power plant is a war crime. And we're also hearing from an interview on Fox News, a Ukrainian member of parliament has said this is World War III. You know, I've used World War III in many titles. I've used nuclear war because that's kind of the framing in the news that's happening, but I am getting increasingly angry at hearing this, particularly from the Ukrainians. We are trying to avoid World War III. This is why, right now it's being reported, NATO is rejecting calls for a no-fly zone. A no-fly zone is effectively a declaration of war, telling Russia, we will shoot you down. We don't want this. It's bad enough. Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine. Unfortunately, the response would just be dramatic escalation, and it's hard to know how to deal with it. But within Ukraine, we are hearing the most outrageous and sensationalized things, and it is infuriating. According to international experts, there is no release of radiation from this nuclear power plant, no risk of a major explosion. Yet what do we hear from Zelensky? That this could be worse than Chernobyl and all of Europe is at stake. I'm sick of it. I'm sorry, Ukraine. I think you're a fantastic country. I actually like Zelensky. To a certain degree, he's starting to get on my nerves with his constant fear-mongering. Oh, the world is going to end. Europe, or I should say, he's Europe will be destroyed. It's World War III, says a Ukrainian activist. It's World War III, says a member of parliament. We're not there yet, and we don't want to be. And truth be told, there's a real possibility we get there, and I hope that's not the case. It's not being helped by the likes of Lindsey Graham, who has publicly called for the assassination of Vladimir Putin. The Kremlin now says he's a drunk and other derogatory statements. We don't want World War III. We don't want an invasion in Ukraine. And how do we deal with it? Honestly, I don't know. The sanctions, however, appear to be working. As much as there is this escalation, even China now seems to be backing off, with the Wall Street Journal saying China's banks are not going to pick up the tab for Russia amid these sanctions because they're too severe. We're seeing other BRICS nations like Brazil and India declare neutrality. I mean, these are countries you'd expect to step up to support Russia. There should be an alternative economic system, but apparently it's not happening. Russia is becoming increasingly isolated. Now, there's a risk there. Russia is the most powerful nuclear power, and Putin is being backed into a corner when even his own allies are saying, yo, we don't know if we want to get behind this. But it's not absolute. Of course, Brazil, India, or China could change their tune. It does seem, however, that while China is pushing the pro-Russian narrative, at least one China-backed bank is backing away from lending to Russian banks or corporations. This is to suggest we could be seeing a de-escalation. Perhaps Russia can't handle this. Even the children of many elites and oligarchs seem to be backing away. They're posting online saying, no war. It's Putin who wants this. They've lost the propaganda campaign. They've lost their own international culture war. I don't know how Russia can continue to sustain this. And it really is starting to feel like it may actually turn out for the best. Now, there's a risk the war escalates. Currently, based on what I'm seeing with Brazil, India, and China, I think Putin's in trouble, man. I think he really is. Now, I don't know if the U.S. will get involved, but I think Putin is very much in trouble. Now, on top of all of that, we're seeing an increase in censorship. We are seeing insane war hysteria and propaganda. Russian cats being banned from cat shows. It's insane. The war hysteria is dangerous. We need to be aware of it and call it out. And we need to be pragmatic and responsible as to what's happening with Vladimir Putin. We need to stop him, but I don't know if direct involvement is the right move. I'll say it because I've said it before. We're already involved in this war through propaganda, through resources, financing. Even Latvia has voted for their citizens to be able to go and volunteer for the Ukrainian side of the war effort, which is effectively Latvia saying our people will enter this war. Why would Russia be like, well, that's totally unrelated? No, I think it is escalating, but maybe no one has an appetite for actual nuclear war. Well, let's read the latest news to see what's going on. Before we get started, however, head over to timcast.com and become a member to help support our work. We are constantly digging through the news, fact-checking. We have original reporting. We have aggregation. We have boots on the ground. We don't always get it right, but we try our best, and we always make sure any corrections will have a correction. Any alteration to an article, we will note. If we misspell a word, we will put a note. Misspelled word. Because I don't believe in stealth edits. It's disgusting. No, we try our best, and with your support, our journalists are able to keep working. And as a member, you'll get access to our members-only podcasts from Timcast IRL. Definitely want to check these out. They're a whole lot of fun. We had a great episode last night and the day before. Or maybe not the day before. What is it? Actually, yeah, the day before. But we didn't have a members-only for the State of the Union because we went long. But Monday through Thursday at 11 p.m., check it out. Now, let's read the first story from Daily Mail. U.S. Embassy in Kyiv calls Putin's shelling of Europe's biggest nuclear plant a war crime. Operator says staff are working at gunpoint as Biden gives Ukrainians in America protected status during barbaric invasion. They go on to say Russian troops attacked the Zaporizhzhia plant in the early hours of Friday with surveillance capturing a fierce gun between Putin's men and Ukrainian defenders that sparked a fire in a 6-story training building just outside the main complex. Moscow's men then stopped firefighters getting to the building for several hours, while Russian forces continued their relentless bombardment of cities across the country. Now, I want to stress, right now, this is the reporting we have. Take it or leave it. I'm wary of any news report that claims Vladimir Putin is a comic book villain. Like, we're not going to allow firefighters to put out fires. I mean, that just sounds weird to me, but possible. I'm wary of these things, but recognize if there is an active firefight, a gunfight happening, and a truck pulls up and you're in active combat, I don't think someone's going to be like, oh, those guys are okay. They're going to be like, nah, I don't trust you. For all they know, those guys in firefighter outfits are undercover or you know, it's guerrilla tactics or something. So it may be the case. Now, of course, they tried pushing the narrative that the nuclear power plant was going to blow up and be worse than Chernobyl, and that is not true. It does seem like there are there's NATO affiliated organizations and Western organizations that are trying to say, calm down. It feels to me like NATO is actively trying to stop Russia, but not with ground war. Ukraine doesn't care. They're like, give us the planes and come in guns a-blazing. And I can kind of feel the frustration of NATO in that regard, because it's kind of like, yo, Zelensky, NATO is going to provide the best support we can while avoiding World War III, but y'all need to calm down. The war effort on the West is propaganda, influence, and resources to avoid World War III. It is effective and annoying, mind you. I'm not a fan of the propaganda. I'll cut through it to the best of my abilities. But if Ukraine thinks that by screaming World War III over and over again or nuclear explosion is going to sway us, the NATO or the West, to get involved, it ain't working. Now, I say us because that is the greater community of the West. But me personally, there's got to be some serious and dramatic escalation before I think the U.S. should be involved. And that likely includes like U.S. targets being hit. We already are involved. Accept the war effort you get. I'm sorry it's happening. I'm not a fan. I think Ukraine's amazing. Vladimir Putin's the bad guy, but they say the U.S. Embassy in Ukraine released a statement on Friday condemning the attack on Zaporizhzhia and hinted it is further evidence the Russian leader should be investigated in The Hague. It is a war crime to attack a nuclear power plant. Putin's shelling of Europe's largest nuclear plant takes his reign of terror one step further. Secretary of State Antony Blinken warned Russia on Friday NATO will defend every inch of its territory against a Russian attack, as he condemned Moscow's attack on the nuclear plant as reckless. Now, this is the next story we have here, and this is where I grow more concerned. The U.S. and NATO likely will not just say, at the request of Ukraine, we have decided we're going to war. What likely will happen is that Poland will be hit, or Latvia, or Estonia. I think Latvia is potentially a target here. NATO will then say, due to Article 5 or whatever, we are obligated to defend, and thus we are entering the war. That's scary to me. Scary because the U.S. is not above using false flags to pull themselves into a war. I'm referring specifically to the Gulf of Tonkin incident, where the U.S. basically was like, oh no, we've been hit, and we weren't. And then we were like, now we have to go to war in Vietnam, and then we did, and it was kind of a catastrophe. But it's also possible there's a much simpler potentiality. Latvia recently voted to allow their citizens to volunteer for the Ukrainian war effort. Russia might say, you are providing manpower from a NATO state now, not just planes or guns or bullets or money. You have active NATO civilians enlisting in the Ukrainian forces. That is Latvia. And what happens if Russia then says, you are providing material support? We consider that to be an aggression by NATO, and they go into Latvia. Now, that would be scary. We've already seen reports that Russia has invaded Swedish airspace near Gotland Island and Japanese airspace with a helicopter. Perhaps Japan and Sweden are mistaken, or perhaps this is legitimate reporting from two of our allies. Perhaps Russia knows that they can saber rattle, threaten effectively nuclear war, and it will keep these other countries out of the fold. Maybe things escalate, maybe they don't. My assessment, based on everything we've seen, it's likely that Vladimir Putin does not escalate beyond Ukraine. It seems like he is making moves to cut the country in half, and that's it. There is a real possibility they bring in troops through Odessa. We have seen photos and videos showing the Russian naval forces outside of Odessa. Perhaps they won't invade. We don't know. Based on a map put up by Lukashenko of Belarus, it looks like they might. Now, some are saying that's an outdated map, but regardless, it looks like they might. And if they do, the fear is Russia moves into Transnistria, which they already occupy, and use that as a staging ground for a Western assault on Ukraine. I don't know where this ends, but Antony Blinken says the NATO military alliance is ready for conflict if it comes, but that the U.S. and its allies are not seeking a confrontation with Russia. Blinken made the remarks in Brussels, Belgium on Friday, where he is meeting with NATO foreign ministers and the alliance's Secretary General, Jens Stoltenberg, as Russia's invasion of Ukraine enters its 9th day. Ours is a defensive alliance. We seek no conflict, but if conflict comes to us, we are ready for it, and we will defend every inch of NATO territory. At the same time, as the Secretary General says, we're preparing for NATO's future, and the events of the last few weeks as they continue will further inform that future. Will this lead to NATO involvement? I don't know. Bluster rhetoric. This seems to me like it is, on a scale of 1 to 100, this is a 1 in terms of escalation. It is NATO saying we're ready for war. It's not a whole lot. Interestingly, Vladimir Putin claims he's not even at war. Well, so they report. I'm exaggerating, mind you. Putin says his forces are not bombing Ukrainian cities, as 100 people are feared buried under rubble near Kiev. Mariupol is simply being destroyed, and missile fragment hits near Zelensky's second home. Daily Mail reports a delusional Vladimir Putin has again insisted that Russia is not bombing Ukrainian cities, despite fears that 100 people are buried under rubble after an apartment block near Kiev was struck, and after a cluster bomb attack on the city of Chernihiv, which killed 49. Now, I have no reason to believe Vladimir Putin, let me tell you. What is he suggesting? Is the suggestion that the bombings we're seeing are actually false flags, that Ukraine is bombing itself to get NATO involvement to go against Russia? I don't believe that for a second. I really don't. There's like, look, the Gulf of Tonkin incident was like a U.S. ship just said, oh no, we've been hit. That was kind of it. When people talk about false flag attacks, I am not a fan of the idea that a country would inflict upon itself such massive collateral damage when they don't need to. You could have like one guy be captured with documents trying to do something, and that would be casus belli for, you know, for any nation for the most part. Perhaps you a cause of war, a cause for war, a justification of war. Perhaps you want more than that. You could have a handful of people and you're like, look who we caught and look what we caught them with. You don't need to blow up multiple residential buildings across your own country to be like, So I will add as well, some people have taken issue with false framing from the media, which are correct, happens all the time. What do we know about the real context of Vladimir Putin's statements? The problem is I don't speak Russian. I can only report as I see. So take it with a grain of salt. And I'll say this too, because I'll do the same thing. Is Vladimir Putin really saying he's not bombing Ukrainian cities? Or did he say something like, in this instance, he didn't do it? I don't know. I got to be honest. I'm less inclined to believe the people defending Vladimir Putin simply because he invaded Ukraine. That's it. Is Zelensky waving his arms in the air and screaming? Yes, but he is being invaded, and I can understand that. We have this story from timcast.com. Ukrainian member of parliament, World War III has already started. No, it hasn't. You're just being attacked. I'm sorry it's happening to you, but none of us want World War III. Stop acting like it already started. This assessment by these activists, journalists, members of parliament, when they say this, they're effectively saying, no matter what happens, World War III is here. I don't agree. I don't. But of course, they're going to say that because if World War III has started, then NATO needs to be involved. And that will benefit Ukraine. Lawmaker Alexei Goncharenko appeared on Fox and Friends first to urge the United States to provide his country with more weapons. Host Trace Gallagher was discussing how the U.S. was hesitant to put boots on the ground out of concern it could spark World War III. The World War III has already started. If somebody doesn't see it, it's their problem, Goncharenko said. It's war not against Ukraine, but against the whole free world. Despite his assertion, Goncharenko claimed that Ukraine does not want the U.S. to send soldiers, just weapons, though he would later contradict that claim. We're not asking for boots on the ground, but give us possibilities. Goncharenko went on to request Patriot missiles and a no-fly zone on the border with Poland, which would have to be enforced by troops ready to shoot down Russian planes. He said he wanted a humanitarian air corridor to assist with evacuating children from conflict zones. Additionally, the lawmaker asked for the U.S. to ban Russian oil and gas. Goncharenko stated that if Putin invades Kiev, we will meet him there and there will be hell for them, I assure you. While he predicts that Ukraine will ultimately win the war, he said that there could be a massacre if Russia takes any major cities. Ukraine, I don't see winning this, not without serious international support. They're getting some. Russia is powerful. Okay, many people are like, oh, their military is not strong enough to sustain this. And it's like, look at a comparison. Compare the military might of NATO as a whole with Russia. Russia may be one of the most powerful countries on the nation, on the planet. Now, when you look at Europe as a whole or the US as a whole, okay, Russia is not all that powerful. When you look at, when you look at the EU as a whole, Russia's probably got substantial resources, more power than they do. You throw the United States into the mix and Russia is like 60% or like 50% of NATO's forces. Comparably, there's like different capabilities. I think Russia is, they're the experts in winter warfare, icebreakers, etc. Certainly is a quote. Certainly there will be guerrilla fighting and we will never accept, the Russian government, he said. We want peace as soon as possible, but we are not going to surrender. Putin is speaking about peace talks on the one hand, and on the other hand, he is throwing missiles and bombs to our kindergartens. It looks like all of these peace talks from Putin for the moment are just tricks. Now, who do you believe? I am not on the side of Russia on this one, and I'm not going to be because they invaded. I don't like war. I don't like instigators. You can talk about the U.S. and regime change, but I'm sorry, man. If the U.S. is buying and selling influence and it's working, that's basically how you do it. They've figured a way to convince Ukrainians to accept this, and Ukrainians are in favor of it. Russia doesn't like it, so they're using military force. I think it's wrong. World War III. Will we really see it? The Philadelphia Inquirer says yes. World War III has already started in Ukraine, Europe, and the Europe and the U.S. should wake up. Trudy Rubin says this is a war for the world. A haggard Vladimir Zelensky told CNN, Ukrainians are fighting for us, the United States, for Europe, and for you, and for me. Oh, quiet. Russia doesn't even have support of their own economic bloc, the BRICS nations. Brazil, Bolsonaro says we're going to remain neutral. India, we're going to be neutral. China, which was supporting their narrative and still kind of is backing away. I don't see where South Africa is. So Russia, their buddies aren't even getting their back. You want to call this World War III? We ain't there. They say if Putin can openly threaten nuclear war to scare off NATO from halting its aggression, then much of Europe is in danger. If this deranged killer can play dangerous games of cyber attacks and nuclear weapons, then the threat extends across the Atlantic to the U.S. I want to say that outright. Say this outright. Vladimir Putin has a good chance of winning. Why? Because he knows we don't want World War III, and we know it's like a poker game. Vladimir Putin, we know he's got a good hand. He does. In fact, he might have pocket rockets, quite literally. And the United States might be holding, ace king suited if you're familiar with poker. We know he's got a good hand. and he's pushing on us. However, maybe he's not willing to play the hand he has. We suspect he has a good hand, nuclear weapons. But maybe this time, this conflict, it's not the one where he's willing to go all in. Unfortunately for us, we have been screaming at the top of their lungs, we are not going all in on this one. We're not betting. So Putin's just raising every go, knowing we're going to fold. He's going to get what he wants. He'll win this pot. It's not the end of the poker game, but Putin knows he can press his hand this time. I think he's going to win this one for that reason. Of course, what does win mean? I don't know. It's a resistance and insurgency in Ukraine will be fierce. And rest assured, you'll see the Ukrainian people are not going to take this lying down. Well, Vladimir Putin may end up controlling the country. And as long as he stops there, that may be it. But what next? If Vladimir Putin knows he's holding these cards, and we know he's holding these cards, so nobody wants to bet against him. To put it simply, it's like imagine playing poker with someone every single hand has a pair of aces. Eventually, you're going to have to say, I'm going to take my bet on the flop or whatever that I can beat pair of aces, pocket rockets. I don't know, poker analogy, whatever. The point is, eventually someone's going to have to say, you know what? I will go all in to shut you down, and therein lies the problem. Putin may or may not drop a more powerful hand. You know what happens? Putin's sitting there holding pair of aces, and he keeps getting it every single time because he's holding nukes. And eventually someone says, look, I've got, king, queen suited. It's good. I'm hoping I'm going to get the cards I need to beat a pair. And then what happens? Well, maybe we make that bet and we get two pair. We beat Putin's hand with a pair of deuces and a pair of threes, and we're like, we finally got him. And then all of a sudden, the last card, it's an ace, trips. Putin gets three of a kind, and then we're like, now we're in serious trouble. Therein lies the problem. No one in the West is willing to take that bet. And I totally understand it. We're not talking about poker chips here. We're talking about, nuclear annihilation. But eventually someone's going to have to say, I don't think he's got it. And they're going to have to push back. I think what we're seeing is crazy, but let's move through some of these sanction stories as we can to show what's going on, because I do want to say I think Russia they may take Ukraine, but I think it's limited here. Bipartisan lawmakers call on Biden administration to end Russian oil imports. I'm always wary of the phrase bipartisan because it'll be like Adam Kinzinger and, Liz Cheney along with like Chuck Schumer or something. Yeah, not really bipartisan. But truth be told, I think even the populist right especially are like, sanctions are better than war. I've seen a lot of conservatives and pro-Trump people say, arm the Ukrainians and GTFO. We have Belarus strengthening its air defenses along the border. Not a good sign, but, just another sign of some kind of escalation. In terms of the more positive news, we have this from Bloomberg. China-backed development banks halt Russia loans amid sanctions. The Multilateral Center said in a statement Thursday that all activities relating to Russia and Belarus are on hold and under review, as it strives to do the utmost to safeguard the financial integrity of the bank, while expressing sympathy and offering support to those who have been adversely impacted by the war. The statement didn't condemn the war or announce any further measures against the two countries. But this is an interesting pullback from China. The Wall Street Journal reports why China's banks won't come to Russia's rescue. The risk of additional sanctions deters Chinese lenders, while a fledgling payment network relies on the SWIFT global payment system. They say on paper, China's banks and its homegrown payment system could offer Russia respite from crippling Western sanctions. In practice, it isn't that simple. The impasse shows how hard it is for Beijing and Moscow to circumvent the dollar-centric international financial system. Despite the duo's shared interest, and even though China has some experience in helping other nations evade sanctions, Western countries have imposed an array of penalties on Russia in the past week. This we know. China has long been concerned about what it calls dollar hegemony, especially as the trade war with the U.S. worsened. The two countries increasingly trade with each other without using dollars, giving Russia an important outlet for selling oil, gas, and other products without touching the U.S. financial system. Just over a third of Russia's exports to China were settled in dollars as of last September. The most recent data available shows down from 96% in 2013, a little more than half of China's exports the other way were settled in dollars, down from 90%. But this trade pales against the other markets now largely shut off to Russia. And while Beijing has also been vocal in its recent opposition to sanctions, big Chinese banks aren't likely to ride to Russia's rescue. The first problem is that Chinese financial institutions have been less keen on the idea of banking Russian clients than their political leaders are. Professor Shiwu Chen, chair of finance at the University of Hong Kong's Business School, was involved in helping arrange early meetings between Chinese banks and Russian companies in 2014 and 15. At that point, Chinese banking executives really had no interest. They did not want to do anything with Russia. And I'll tell you what my thoughts are on this. China likes to gut the United States and exploit our resources, IP, and wealth. They need to suckle from the teat of the United States as long as possible to supplant us. Jumping now over to a lesser player, Russia, with a very small economy, could cut them off from the larger economics of the world. If China wants to win, they can't play that game. And so it looks like China may actually back away, which is surprising. I didn't expect this one, but I can see the argument being made. Now, I will also push back and say this is just an analysis and opinion of some people at the Wall Street Journal and some other outlets, and it's one bank. China is actually embracing the Russian narrative. The New York Times reports how China embraces Russian propaganda and its version of the war. In much of the world, Russia is losing the information war over Ukraine. In China, though, it's winning big. I agree with the assessment. I'm not a fan of the New York Times for a lot of reasons, but I agree. Ukraine is doing way better. You look at social media, you look at media reports, the stories are there. Zelensky, war hero, big brass balls, all that stuff. In reality, Ukraine is being crushed. As far as we can actually tell, it's hard to sift through the fog of war and propaganda. And while Zelensky does appear to be an effective leader doing things right to boost morale, he's being aided substantially by Western media forces. That's war, baby. Morale is everything. If your soldiers feel like they can't win, they stop fighting and they run and hide. The same is true for Russia. So Russia needs to maintain that, but it doesn't seem like they're doing very much a good job of it. Now in the West, to make sure that no one ever sees the arguments from Putin, we are seeing the most absurd shutdowns. Look at this. Reddit sides with Ukraine and bans all links to Russia's state-sponsored RTN Sputnik. I find that absolutely disgusting. Absolutely disgusting. We have made such restrictions universal across the site in all geographies. They say as far as RT and Sputnik are concerned, it's possibly the most complete deplatforming of those channels yet. Because while Apple, Google, Meta, Microsoft, Twitter, YouTube, and many others have paused their ads or removed content or restricted discoverability, stopped promoting, or both, Facebook and YouTube have blocked, in the US specifically, none of those in this is the same thing as a blanket site-wide global ban on all links. In a blog post, Reddit says, it's already been rejecting ads that target Russia or originate from any Russia-based entity, government or private. Notes that the moderators of some subreddits have already blocked links to Russian state media on their own, and additionally says it's spending to help assist and house some of its staff in Ukraine. When it comes to North Korea, we drop pamphlets. We do things like that. When it came to the Berlin Wall, we would desperately try to get counter narratives to these other countries. We fancied ourselves as freedom-loving individuals who have a right to know the truth. But was that really true? These days, these companies want to make sure you do not have access to information. Look at this. Update. Reddit may be blocking all .ru links, not just state-sponsored media. So does that mean like the Moscow Times, independent media in Russia that's can be critical of Vladimir Putin? They don't want you to know the truth. They don't want you to see these other people as human. There was a meme. Someone said, Russians, we aren't sanctioning you. This is a special financial operation. That's what Putin said, the Russian government, that it was a special military operation. The only problem is they're directing it at the Russian people. I don't think regular people want war with each other for the most part. I think in religious wars and ideological wars, you do see it. But let me show you how insane things are getting. We got to call out the war hysteria, and I will not stand for censorship. From timcast.com, Russian man kicked out of Australian Q&A show for trying to explain why he supports Putin. An audience member said that he had friends in Donbass, that he has Russian heritage, and he knows that Putin was trying to defend the civilians in Donbass that were being killed by the West. Someone yells out, that's a lie. I don't care if it's a lie. This is someone who's making the argument. You think it's a lie? Don't scream at him. They kicked him out. You actually just respond and say, why do you believe that? Here's the actual reporting we have. It doesn't appear your claims are correct. Well, he says, but I have friends who were there. How do you convince them? The show host says, amazingly, I should have done this sooner, but we can't advocate calls for violence. It's psychotic. It's disgusting. And it's evil. War's bad, right? Lying to people is bad too. It's not a call to violence for him to say, my friends are being killed and are scared, and so he supports Putin. That's not a call for violence. I disagree. I think he's probably getting, manipulation. As many of you know, I know people in Eastern Europe, in many countries, Latvia, Poland, Ukraine. And I've heard a lot from them. And one of them told me, Vladimir Putin bombed this specific site. And I said, wow, I didn't know that. And then a few hours later, I read it was actually not true because of fog of war. This is someone I know who's actually from the country. And several others who are from these countries. They're hearing the same things we are hearing. So if you have a friend in Donbass and they're telling you this is what's happening, maybe they're hearing it on the news. Maybe there's some truth to this. Russia was arming the Eastern separatists, and there was fighting. But everyone's going to paint their own perspective and try and defend their view. And they'll say, oh, they're killing us. Well, and the other side's going to say, but they're killing us. What I'm saying is I don't know who's right. I would defend this person's right to stand up and speak out, and he should be challenged legitimately and effectively. Instead, we get insane stories like this. Paralympics bars athletes from Russia and Belarus. Russian cats. The United Nations of Cat Federations has banned Russian cats from its competitions. Why? Poor Russian blue. Ridiculous. Russian cats. They said any cat bred in Russia. So what if I have a Russian blue, but it was bred in the United States? Maybe it's not a real Russian blue then, just like champagne's not really champagne unless it's from the Champagne region of France. Russian cats aren't really Russian cats unless they're from Russia. This is how amazing everything is getting. Google, suspending all advertising in Russia cites extraordinary circumstances. War hysteria is scary. And if this stuff carries on, they've already been vandalizing Russian-owned businesses in the United States. Seizing a yacht from a Russian oligarch or whatever, taking property from a Russian civilian, that's a slippery slope, yo. By all means, Putin is a bad dude, running with some bad boys. That I get. But this is just a whole new level of insanity, man. It's one of the reasons I hate war. We want peace, we want development, we want prosperity. We can't get it. Now, by all means, blame Vladimir Putin. He's the one who started the fight. He can argue we did, but I'll tell you this, man. We're allowed to pitch, sell, and weasel. I'm not a fan of what Joe Biden does or what the U.S. was doing with Ukraine, but weaseling is not murder, is not killing. Invasion is collateral damage and destruction, and it's just too much. I get it. I do. And a lot of people are going to cite Donbass and say that's why he needed to invade. But if that was the case, he would have kept it to Donbass, right? Peacekeeping. As he tries to take Kiev, sure. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 8 p.m. over at youtube.com/TimCastIRL. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you all then.